Hello, my name is June. I am a bass music producer, DJ, sound designer, music educator, and today I wanted to talk about chord patches. A chord patch is a synth or a sampler preset that outputs an entire chord with a single MIDI note. Typically, the note you're playing on your MIDI keyboard is the root note of the chord, and typically that chord is of a single quality, inversion, and voicing. So if I hit a note on my MIDI keyboard and get a root position closed voice major triad, then it should remain a root position closed voice major triad regardless of what key I am pressing. Now, chord patches aren't usually patches. Most of the time, they are samples that are being played back at different pitches. This actually demonstrates the history of the chord patch. Producers would sample chord stabs off of their favorite records and play them back at various pitches on their hardware sampler of choice. It was a technical limitation that ended up giving way to one of the more unique sounds of electronic music of the late 80s and 90s. Now, there are two approaches I'm going to outline in this video. The first is using a chord patch to write a chord progression. This is how I suspect most people are going to be using it. And the second is getting the chord patch to fit into an already existing chord progression. This is how I've been using chord patches in a lot of the experiments I've been doing recently. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the producers of this era are applying the techniques as I describe them here. These are just approaches that make sense to me and fit with the way that I tend to make music. So let's not waste any time and let's hop into the DAW. So I have two patches loaded up. The first is a kind of DX7 inspired stab that is outputting a major chord. And the second is this kind of funky organ inspired patch that is outputting a minor chord. If you want any of these sounds or just want to support me, patreon.com/June_Bernie. I release monthly sample packs, all of which are available to all $1 and up patrons. Now, there's going to be some theory jargon related to keys and chords and chord qualities. So if any of that is confusing to you, I highly recommend checking out my previous video, the Clear Cut Creative Chords Crash Course. That should get you caught up. Now, we're going to be using these patches to write a progression from scratch. And when using this technique, it's important that the chord quality output by our patch matches the quality of the key that we are playing in. So if you're writing in a major key, you should use a major triad. And if you're writing in a minor key, you should use a minor triad. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult to establish our one chord. We can't really imply the key of C major without eventually playing a C major chord. Let's start, of course, in the key of C major, just to keep things simple. And so let's start with the most basic example I can think of. Writing in the key of C major, let's use only the major chords from that key. These are the 1, 4, and 5 chords, which are C major, F major, and G major, respectively. That will sound something like this. Sorry. That shit was just so boring. Let's add some extra color chords using modal interchange. Again, this is covered in my chords video, but a short explanation is that we borrow chords from the parallel minor. So if we're in the key of C major, we borrow chords from C minor. If we're in C minor, we borrow chords from C major. You get the principle. In the key of C major, our major chords are C major, F major, and G major. And in the key of C minor, our major chords are E flat major, A flat major, and B flat major. So let's write a 4-chord loop using these chords. This is a bit more interesting. We start off with a chromatic mediant, a C major going to an E flat major, go to the 5 chord of C major, which is G major, and end things off with a B flat major. Now, if you listen to a lot of the aforementioned, 90s electronic drum and bass and garage and stuff like that, these chord patches aren't just played on the downbeat of every measure. Usually there's some sort of rhythmic and melodic application. So let's add just a bit more rhythmic interest. But again, I think we can do a little bit better. I want to add a few passing chords, chords that act as stepping stones to other chords. We can still think about this progression as like our skeleton, but then we have these little stepping stones between those skeletons. This metaphor is falling apart. We can think about each of these chords as being a little island, and then we can add passing chords that act as stepping stones between those islands. That analogy works better. So I'll change this C to an F, and I'll change this G to an E flat. Let's listen back. Definitely a bit more interesting. This is the end result that you were probably expecting. I neglected chord patches for a really long time, but now that I'm learning a bit more about them and experimenting with them, I'm really glad that I took the time. Let's do the same thing, except this time in a minor key, borrowing from the parallel major. So we'll be in C minor, borrowing from C major. I have a chord patch here that is a minor chord. So the minor triads in the key of C minor are C minor, duh, F minor, and G minor. And the minor triads from C major are D minor, E minor, and A minor. So again, if we were to do something just in the key of C minor, it might sound like this. This is boring. We don't want to do this. So let's still start with a C minor just to establish C minor as our home key. Then maybe we'll do G minor, and then A minor, and then D minor. This sounds like this. This A minor is quite high, so if I were actually writing, I'd probably take everything down, say to the key of F minor, and I would sound like this. But for the sake of keeping things simple, everything's in C. And again, just like last time, we're going to add some rhythmic variation. So let's try something like this. And then again, adding a couple passing chords. Let's add an E minor here, and then maybe an F minor here. Maybe I'll even take this A minor down an octave. Now, this next section is about fitting these chord patches into an already existing chord progression. Now, in this example, the previously written chord progression is acting as kind of a framework or a guideline on top of which we can construct other musical ideas. I talk about this principle in a previous video. In fact, it's kind of a central guiding philosophy of a lot of the music I write. The idea that a chord progression isn't really just the notes you play in a chord, but more so how the idea of those chords inform other decisions. It's a subject that should probably be its own video, but for now, just understand that chords and chord progressions, or the changes, aren't necessarily the same thing. So I've written this progression here with a simple pad sound, and then I put a bass line playing all of the root notes underneath, and it sounds like this. Now, these chords aren't actually going to be in the final product. They're only there to get your ear acclimated to the idea of these chords. Now, I wanted to include all 4 of the 7th chord qualities that I discussed in my chord progressions video. That is major 7, minor 7, dominant 7, and minor 7 flat 5. And we are going to superimpose these major triads and minor triads over these different chord qualities in various ways in order to write some interesting parts for our chord patch. So the progression is C minor 7, E flat major 7, F sharp dominant 7, and then B minor 7 flat 5. Again, this example is a little bit forced because I wanted to include all 4 7th chord qualities, but it will serve our purposes. So rather than explaining all of the valid superimpositions over each individual chord quality, I'd rather just show you this table that I made. If this is a technique you want to implement, I suggest writing this down, and I'll explain what this means as I move forward. So we're going to start by superimposing major triads over this progression. For most chords, we have a few options. However, for some chords, we only have one. So I guess in that case, the decision is kind of made for us. So let's start by superimposing these major triads over this chord progression. So I'm actually going to mute the progression itself, and I'm going to reference my table, which I have in front of me right now. And I see that we have a C minor 7. If we're superimposing a major triad over this C minor 7, we can place it on the flat 3, which is E flat, the 4, which is F, or the flat 7, which is B flat. Let's try a B flat at first. We can also do the 4, so maybe we'll do something like this. Again, the 4 is F. And then the flat 3, which is E flat, we'll try that here. Let's give it a more interesting rhythm. Something like this. And you may be able to hear, even though we're not hearing that explicit C minor 7, the combination of these 3 triads over the bass note gives a strong implication of C minor 7. Let's do the same thing with E flat major 7. Our valid superimpositions for a major triad are the 3, the 6, and the 7. And the valid superimpositions of a major triad over a major 7 chord are the 1, the 2, and the 5. So in E flat, that would be E flat is the 1, F is the 2, and B flat is the 5. So let's start with F, the 2. We could do the 1, but I actually think that's kind of the most boring option in this case. We'll give it a shot anyway. And then B flat, the 5. Now over that E flat major 7, we have this. Again, that in combination with the bass note gives the strong implication of E flat major 7. Over the dominant 7, we only have 2 options, and that is the 1 and the 2. So over F sharp 7, that would be F sharp and G sharp. Let's start with a G sharp. Then we'll just do another G sharp, and then an F sharp. So these 2 chords over our bass note, F sharp, gives a strong implication of F sharp 7. And finally, over the minor 7 flat 5, we can superimpose a major triad on the flat 6 or the flat 7. So in this case, G is the flat 6 and A is the flat 7. Here's the G, do another G, and then the A. Now, I actually suspect that the G in this instance is going to sound a little funky. It's one of those technically correct chords, but let's give it a listen over that bass note. A little funky, but I think it's okay. So now let's listen to how all of this sounds over our bass line. Okay, that G actually sounds better than I thought it would. We can actually listen to this back with the chords that we previously wrote. And you can hear that it works. Granted, it's a little bit busy, so I probably wouldn't include the pads in a final arrangement of a piece. But at least harmonically speaking, they fit together well. So now the minor triads over the same chord progression. Over a minor 7 chords, the valid superimpositions for a minor triad are the 1, the 2, and the 5. So in the case of C minor, that would be a C minor triad, a D minor triad, and a G minor triad. Let's start with a D minor triad. I actually quite like this sound. Then let's jump up to G minor, and then back down to C minor. And that together with the bass line sounds like this. Then over a major 7 chord, the valid superimpositions for a minor triad are the 3, the 6, and the 7. So in the case of E flat major 7, G is the 3, C is the 6, and D is the 7. Funnily enough, those are the same 3 triads that we used in the previous measure over C minor 7. But of course, that's not always going to be true in every circumstance. It just happened to work out that way. So let's try G, then D, then C. That is the 3, the 7, and the 6. Let's listen to what that sounds like over our bass note. Okay, no egregious clashing to speak of. Now, over the dominant 7, we actually only have one option when it comes to superimposing a minor triad, and that is on the 5. So in the case of F sharp 7, that would be on the note C sharp. So let's just play a C sharp, and we can give it a funky rhythm just to keep it a bit more interesting. So the C sharp minor triad over our bass note F sharp sounds like this. This doesn't quite give a strong implication of a dominant 7th chord, in my opinion. So in an actual arrangement, I would probably include some other musical elements, which would help contribute to that dominant 7 sound. Same goes for the minor 7 flat 5. The only valid superimposition of a minor triad is on the flat 3. So in the case of B minor 7 flat 5, that would be on the note D, which actually works out well because then it circles back to the note D at the beginning of the loop. This D minor triad over the note B actually does give a strong implication of B minor 7 flat 5. In fact, the D minor triad is actually just the highest 3 notes of the B minor 7 flat 5. So adding that note B gives us a firm B minor 7 flat 5. And it sounds like this. All together over our bass line, it sounds like this. So this was actually a really fun video to make because I don't actually use chord patches that often. So me making this video has actually inspired me to start incorporating more into the music that I make. Now, obviously the approach I had here is very theoretical or maybe analytical, but like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't want to suggest that producers like Goldie, for example, were thinking about things in this way, because they most certainly were not. These are just some frameworks that I've come up with that have been really helpful for me. And at the end of the day, if it sounds good, it is good. I could throw as much theory jargon as I want, but if you like it, you like it. So that's going to be it for this video. I'm actually in the process of writing an outline for a video that is a massive deep dive into the subject of superimposing triads over bass notes. That one won't focus specifically on chord patches, but it's a video I'm really excited about. So if that sounds cool to you, please consider subscribing. If you'd like to support what I do here, patreon.com/June_Bernie. Hit the bell, which it turns out I do have, despite what I said in my last video. And I appreciate you taking the time. Have a good one.
Yeah. Catch me at my darkest, feeling a spark to start shit. It's bloodstained fingers on a pen, feeling marvelous. The people already shown what is sown when you dig deep. 6 feet, if you can run away, grab some big cleats and fly, kid. Cause I'm designed to find dine shit with the timeless fangs as a creature.